So we've planted trees, we've planted grasses. What about some other stuff? When I say planting objects, and when I refer to planting, I'm referring to things in a decent amount of volume, right? And objects, I'm referring to things other than trees and plants. One of the most common thing is rocks, right? Or we might want to plant and put some rocks out to make things look a little bit more realistic. This is really where the Unity planning tools are going to fall short for you. You're going to have to make some concessions here. And this is also why if you decided to use the Unity planning tools, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, essentially, to get your course published because you're not going to be able to plant a lot of rocks and grasses and things because of performance. And then it's going to be very difficult to kind of make them look good. And you're going to see why here in a second. So first of all, let's go back into Unity, and we've got two ways to plant grasses, or I'm sorry, to plant objects like rocks. One is we can use the Unity tools, but there's a drawback, and I'll show you what that is in a second. So first of all, we're going to go here. We're on our grasses terrain. Let's go to Edit Details, and to add something like a rock, it's a mesh. It's not a texture. It's a mesh. So go to Add Detail Mesh. And then in our base project, we have a directory full of rocks. There are tons of other rocks that you can purchase in Unity and other places. So you can get lots of this. So if you don't like these, I particularly don't like these. But let's just say, let me put rock 3 up here. And by default, this is going to try to make things green and tan like grasses, and that's not what I want. So I'm just going to turn these off. So I just get the default color of the rocks, which is going to be like a brown. You're going to see this. And let me just show you, leave everything by default and add that in for now, and then you're going to see what's going to happen. Whoops, I'm on the wrong thing. I'm planting a grass still. And oh, wow, look at the size of that thing. Okay, so first of all, it is plain. That's the default size of the rock. So let's just edit it. Whoops, we don't want to add, we want to edit. Uh, edit, and boy, let me do like a tenth of that, right? 0.1, let's just do 0.1 down the line here. 0.1, 0.1, apply. Much better. And you can see now I got a bunch of smaller rocks. So because of the density, yeah, so I'm planting some rocks here. Looking pretty good. I don't, these rocks are okay. They're kind of cubic to me, but, and I'm not a big fan of the color. You can change the color or you can just get different rocks in general. But let me show you the challenge with this. So if we come up and we go into game mode, which we should have done earlier to check performance, and I go into game mode, and now I look over here and I have windy rocks now because the Unity planning tool, it treats all grasses, whether they're meshes, whether they're textures, the same, and it's applying wind to that. So how do you get rid of that? Well, let me back out of game mode because any changes I make right now will not be saved, remember? So I'm going to get out of game mode. I'm going to go back to my terrain settings, and you're going to see down here that my wind settings for grass, I have to turn those off. So what's the drawback? Well, the drawback is your grasses aren't going to move now. So if you plant any rocks or objects, you have to turn off wind for those. The other option would be you could create a whole other terrain like we did. We could call another one rocks. And you could create a whole other terrain just for stationary things that don't have wind. You could do that as well. Now you have 3 terrains that you have to deal with beyond the inner terrain. Another potential solution to this, which also has drawbacks, is to plant the rocks by hand. So by hand is really simple. You just take the prefab, let's say rock 2. Oh, that's gigantic. Let's not do that one. I have to resize it. Let's just do a rock group 1. That's good. Rock group 1, I bring it out here and you can see it's kind of hovering. So I have to go back into I like this multi-tool, bring it down. I can rotate a little bit and then I can control D to duplicate. And now I got 2 of them. And you can see over here, these are now game objects. I got rock group 1 up here. I got this one. I can duplicate that again and I can move it, but you can see it's a little tedious, right? I have to do everything by hand. doable. It's just going to take a lot of time. You can say, okay, so what's the drawback? The drawback is that these are rendered everywhere now. And what I mean by render is, let me back out here. I'm sorry, this is hard to see. Let me get rid of my gizmo. You can see that everything I planned with the Unity grass brush, the detail brush, has now disappeared. However, the ones I planted by hand are still there. So that means no matter how far I go away, Unity has to render those things. Whereas the grasses and these guys, remember, under the terrain, my grass is terrain, remember I can adjust that. So if I've got performance issues with my detail grasses, I can always tone this down to help out. I can't do it with these hand planted ones. They're there, they're permanent, right? And they're different from trees. Trees have level of detail. Some rocks do too. Let me see here. Maybe this one does. No, this is just a grouping of rocks. So there's no level of detail. So I'm always rendering these rocks no matter how far away, and that's going to impact performance. So keep that in mind. So those are the drawbacks, and this is where VS Pro does a much better job. Um, Last thing here as a note is, when you start planting all these, let's say we plant 100 rocks by hand, we got 100 game objects. That starts to get really messy looking, right? So we'll have to create a new empty for that. So create empty. Let's call this rocks. Rocks. And then what we can do is we can remember, as soon as we create an empty, best practice is to change this to 0 space. We want that folder to be in 0 space. And then we can highlight those rocks that we created and just drag them into the folder. And now that's much cleaner looking, right? There's various different ways. This is just an empty folder, more or less, containing these. It's just a way of organization. So, that's definitely an easy way to do that, and a best practice. If you don't put that to 0 space, you could run into some issues later on if you decide to, if that empty space changes or that folder location changes, it'll change the locations of all your rocks. So best thing is just put these new transforms, or these new empty containers in 0 space. So that's it. On to the next section.